The wheel turns once again, and we find ourselves on the brink of Samhain season. The veils are thinner at this time, and this leads many of us to think about our ancestors, think about those who crossed over, and in fact, more souls cross through the veils and across from this plane into the next one at this time. Now, this time we also notice a thinning of the veils between our unconscious and our conscious, and that leads many people to turn inward, feeling a pull and a call towards more inner work and an exploration of their internal landscape. So, we will be talking about all of this and more in tonight's episode. So, merry meet. I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin. And tonight we are talking about Samhain and Samhain magic. So, welcome to those joining us. Merry meet, everyone. I see Cindy and Jamie are in the chat. Welcome, everybody, as people are joining us. So, if you are with us live, you can leave questions and comments. We have a Q&A at the end. It doesn't have to be about Samhain. You can ask questions about witchcraft, shadow work, energy work, etc. If you're watching in replay, you can also leave questions in the chat because I go back, I'll answer those. Or if I think it's a question that many people would like to hear the answer to, then I will add it to next week's episode. You can also leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the video, and that just helps us get it out to the feed of more people. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. I see Amy's also in the chat, and Dawn. Merry meet, everybody. Welcome, guys. Okay, so I wanted to start by talking a little bit about some Sabbath lore, mostly for those who are a little newer to the path, but also those of us who've been on it for a while. It's sometimes nice to brush up on the lore and be reminded what the holiday is actually about. So, Samhain is often called the Celtic New Year, and we're going to discover there's a very important reason for that. Samhain, traditionally, this time of year marked the transition or that space between the light half of the year and the dark half of the year for the ancient Celts. Now, the word Samhain itself, and for those of you who are newer to the craft, it is pronounced Samhain or Samhain sometimes, but not Samhain. Samhain translates roughly to summer's end, or in some translations to the word assembly, which is a little confusing at first, but when you think about it, that interpretation probably comes from this idea that Samhain's origins were really as a harvest festival. And this idea of honoring the dead actually was probably a later addition. Now, people came together to share the recently harvested crops, and they would feast together at this time. Now, well, like I mentioned, it wasn't necessarily to celebrate the dead who had crossed over, but more to celebrate the persistence of life, even when it seems like the land was dying as they were transitioning into the dark half of the year. Now, while some of that vegetation was dying, there was also the Celts always understood that there was something that was alive. So they revered the evergreen, they revered the mistletoe. These were plants that were seen to keep life alive, right? The sustenance of the people. It's a reminder that even when things get dark, even when it seems like the land is going into this more fallow time, there's still life there, and there's still more to come, and there is a renewal of the seasons as we turn through the wheel of the year. Now, the later there came to be this idea of honoring the spirits, not only of the land as it was in the process of kind of moving through that dying half of the year, but also to honor the deceased. And that connection to the living and the dead became more pronounced as time went on. There began to be offerings of food left out for the spirits who had passed. This idea that these spirits would wander the land during this time, kind of searching for a way to cross through fully into the afterlife. And the plates of food were left out, not only to honor them, but also to offer them sustenance on their journey as they were trying to cross through the veils. Now, there's some people who actually believed and continue to believe too. This is a very strong tradition in many witches' covens. Is that those who have died in the past year will stay kind of connected to this plane until the next Samhain comes. And when Samhain comes, because the veils thin so much, it affords them the space and the ability to transfer all the way through the veils and into the afterlife. Now, this idea also extends to some of the other practices that we see in kind of played out in our modern lives as well. So it should be no surprise to many of you who've been on the path for a while that there's a lot of borrowing of traditions, so things that are kind of thought of as being either totally secular or related to Christianity are in fact have their origins and their roots in pagan traditions. So um, not only was there this idea of sort of leaving the food out, there was also people would leave out candles in the windowsills or somewhere in their house, and this again was meant to be a beacon that would aid the dead as they were trying to cross through the veils into the afterlife. There are other stories of people leaving an extra seat for the dead and the deceased, very similar to what Christopher Penczak talks about, and we'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about some of the practices and rituals and spells you can do for Samhain. But Christopher Penczak talks about this idea of leaving out a chair at a ritual or a space during your rituals to invite the mighty dead to come and to be in the ritual with you and experience the ritual with you. So these are some of the many ideas, this idea that the spirits were very active at night, and this led people to want to protect themselves. And so they would carve gourds into the shape of faces that were meant to look like the dead or look like kind of spirits, to have the dead sort of pass by, don't come here, don't stop here, don't bother things. And and this, of course, lends itself to our modern day carving of the pumpkins. We don't do gourds anymore. It's a little bit harder to carve if you ever tried to carve one. The pumpkins are much easier. People may have also dressed in white costumes or costumes made out of straw or kind of pieces of, the harvest materials that were dying in order to not be recognized as alive when the dead were crossing through at this time. And of course, this lends itself very well to our modern idea of dressing up at Halloween. And I say this every single Samhain, but the sexy nurse costumes and all of that people dress up as, it's a far cry from where this traditions actually came from. The idea behind it was to blend in, to be like the dead so that you weren't noticed as all of these souls were crossing through at that time. Now, the Celts were not the only ones who honored the dead at this time of year. Dia de los Muertos is also originated as an Aztec month-long festival and celebration of the dead. It included sacred meals and sacred rituals that would last across a month. And there's also a very similar festival that can be traced back to the Mayans as well. Now, eventually, when the conquistadors came to the New World with their slaughter and their ideas of converting people to Catholicism, because they claimed to have the only right religion, they set out to convert the indigenous peoples. But what they found is it wasn't really all that easy to get people to give up all of their traditions. And so these traditions persisted, the honoring of the dead persisted, and eventually in leaving meals out for the dead, sitting and eating at grave sites or at tombs with the dead, all of this eventually becomes Dia de los Muertos, the celebrations that exist today. So it's really interesting to look across cultures. I think this is an incredibly interesting time of year. And I should make a note that Samhain, as far as Samhain in the Wheel of the Year, it's only celebrated here in the Northern Hemisphere. In the Southern Hemisphere, they are celebrating Imbolc. So anyway, that is correct, right? No, I'm sorry. They would be celebrating Beltane. Sorry. So, but what's very interesting is across the wheel, we also see things that are very, very similar, even though the energies might feel very different to us. So if you think about Samhain and you think about Beltane, and they don't, on the surface, they don't really seem like they have much in common. But one of the things that they do have in common is the thinning of the veils. At Beltane and from Beltane to Litha, to the summer solstice, everything is thinner. because more souls are coming in, more vegetation, more baby animals. There's even an uptick in human life coming into this world at this time. And at Samhain, things thin for a different reason. The veil's thin in order to aid and help those souls crossing over, which are not just human souls. These are also the souls of the vegetation, right? Because there is that idea of death and renewal happening at this time. So as we then sort of move into, well, how does this translate into what witches do in modern witchcraft? Modern witches tend to celebrate Samhain as the third of the three harvest festivals. The first one being Lunaza, which is a harvest of the grain. The second being Mabon, which is the harvest of fruits and some of the other vegetables. And then, of course, Samhain. Now, Samhain is, from that perspective, this is considered the meat harvest. And it probably comes from the idea that the Celts, as they were faced with the beginning of winter, this is the time when the animals were slaughtered that would not be able to survive into the winter. And then through that, the people had sustenance that could help them survive as well. Now, Samhain also marks, from the pagan perspective or perspective of a modern witch, also marks the descent of the god, kind of the final descent into the underworld, often a goddess also following him or descending on her own. Triple goddesses are celebrated in the third form of the crone at this time, and also aging deities of any kind are very much venerated. So when we think about what archetypes are really prominent right now when it comes to our deities, this would be the god or goddess of the underworld, the horned god, the messenger or magician god that many people don't think about as being connected to this time. But the magician or the messenger god is a psychopomp. They are a deity that travels from our world into the afterlife, into the other world. They cross, their passage is made very easy, and they also aid us in our ability to communicate with those on the other side. So before we talk about some of the Samhain magic, which is really what we want to talk about tonight, let's just talk very briefly about timing, because sometimes there's a little confusion about when is Samhain. So traditionally, a Sabbath is celebrated at sundown on one day to sundown on the next day. So the traditional placement of Samhain is October 31st at sundown to November 1st at sundown, so 24 hours. Now, modern witches will typically celebrate either on the 31st. I feel like now I see people celebrating on kind of both. 25 or plus years ago, when I was first starting out, most people were celebrating on November 1st, at least around where I was. But either day can be celebrated. And then there's also the fact that Samhain is a cross-quarter day. And what that means is that Samhain falls between the fall equinox and the winter solstice. Now, because those two dates slightly change every year, Samhain also slightly changes. It is as a cross-quarter day, it's the literal midpoint between those two spots. And so to this year, in 2024, astrological Samhain, the actual literal midpoint between the equinox and the solstice, is Thursday, November 7th. So sometimes people get panicked because they don't have the ability to celebrate on the 1st or on the 31st or sometime near that. They get panicked that they've missed it. And the reality is we won't even experience the astrological Samhain for another week, even though many of us, our coven included, is going to be celebrating starting on Thursday to Friday. So that also brings up a very important point for us, though, is that every Sabbath is a season. It's a seasonal energy. The actual date that we choose to say is that holiday is the start of the season. So Samhain season is going to exist from now until very close to Yule, when the energy starts to shift and we start to move into Yule season. So the point being here, you don't have to panic about being able to celebrate on a specific day, because you have this whole time to be celebrating. And I'm going to share with you, I have 13 different ideas to share with you. You're not going to be able to do all of them in one day. But since you know that this is like really a 6-week seasonal energy, you've got plenty of time to try out some of these practices. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and just welcome, let me see who else is in the chat, welcoming some more who are joining us. I see Kurt is here. Kurt has said it's Samhain is often called Shadowfest. I have never heard that before, but that's a really interesting way to refer to it, and it makes a lot of sense because a lot of what's in the shadows is what's celebrated right now. And then I see Joshua is also here. So merry meet everybody. Welcome. It's great to see you all. So let's kind of move into the practices. And then what I also invite people, those who are live and also those who are going to be watching this later, share some of your practices with us too, especially if they're things that I don't mention at all. We'd love to hear. We always love hearing from other people about their practices. Okay, so I'm going to start. I kind of divided the practices up into those that sort of honor the dead or work with the dead, because that's such a prominent theme at Samhain, and then other practices and spells and rituals that have to do with other things. So let's start with the tolling of the bells. It's probably one of the most traditional celebrations that can happen at Samhain. Tolling of the bells, if you've never been to a tolling of the bells, I highly recommend you find someone who's going to do one and go to it. It's very moving. We ourselves in our coven will be doing one on November 1st. Everyone is invited to that. Shadow Seekers and Coven of Midnight's Flame members are always invited to our Sabbats for free, but those who, it's part of their membership, but those who are not part of our groups can come to this ritual if you'd like by donation. I'll be sharing a link and some more information about it later, but we will be doing a tolling of the bells. So during a tolling of the bells, the names of those who've crossed through the veils are called out, and then a bell is rung after each one, and there's sort of this moment of reverence as we celebrate the crossing of our dearly beloved departed. So the traditional idea of the tolling of the bells is that it's usually those who are honored are those who have died from last Samhain to the present Samhain, so somewhere in the last 365 days. I always say, though, that I don't think that we need to necessarily, if somebody feels called to call out a name and honor someone who died more than a year ago, that's also, to me, in my tolling of bells, that's always welcome. But traditionally, it's those who have passed between the last Samhain and this one. And this can be human souls. It can also be our pets, our familiars, and it's just a really nice way to honor and revere them. It's a very simple ceremony. You can do it as a solitary. I recommend that you make a list beforehand if you're worried about forgetting someone, and then just read off your list, and then you ring a bell in between. Now, another option, and I will show a little bit later, but you can also make a skull rattle doll, or you can make like a gourd shaker, and that can be used in place of the bell. And I'll demonstrate that in just a moment. But the tolling of the bells, like I said, can be done in a solitary ritual, can also be done in a group. When it's done in a large group, it can take some time. We usually just sort of open the floor up and let people just call out the names that they want to be honored, or in our case, since we do the ritual online, we also allow people space to just put them in the chat, and then someone at the ritual will call out the name for them, and then we ring the bell. So just very, very reverent ceremony. Like I said, if you've never experienced one, I highly recommend finding somewhere that's going to do it this Samhain, or join us online and participate in it with us. So another little ritual that you can do that's along similar lines of honoring the dead is a candle lighting ceremony to honor the dead. Now, this can be really beautiful. It takes a little bit of time to set up, a little bit of preparation. But what you would do is you get a lot of candles. And so because of the cost of candles, what I recommend is a bag of tea lights. And sometimes you can find these like online, or like I know at IKEA, we've actually found big bags of 100 tea lights for next to nothing, a couple dollars. So I would get a lot of lights, sort of dependent on how many people that you think you're going to honor. So if you think there's a lot of people on your list, or you're doing this ritual with some friends or loved ones, and they're also going to be honoring people, you just want to make sure that you have enough lights for everybody. And then what you do is you light a candle in the middle, and you kind of put all the candles around that one that you lit. And then from there, you begin to light each of the candles from the center light, and each candle represents a person that you're going to honor. And so you say their name out loud, and then it's up to you. You can tell a story about them, share a memory about them. You can just say something nice about them, and then you move on to the next person, and then you light another candle from the center and then honor someone else. And so again, you could do this as a solitary ritual. You would need less candles if you were doing it alone, or you can do it with a group of people, in which case, the 100 tea light bag might be the right choice for you. But a really very reverent ceremony. As you're going to notice, there's a huge theme when it comes to Samhain. Samhain's about honoring the dead for the most part. But this is, we'll talk about some other ways you can work with Samhain energy, but a lot of it's about honoring the dead. And I think, too, exploring our own immortality as, or I guess I should say our own mortality, and then that part of us that is immortal, kind of exploring that as well. So that is the Samhain candle lighting ceremony to honor the dead. Now, another thing that you can do are to make the skull rattle dolls. So the skull rattle dolls, I found these, and this is going to be going back, at least 15 years, if not further. One of the first years that we ever went to Pagan Pride Day, there was a lady who was selling these skull rattle dolls. And Pagan Pride's always kind of near Samhain, so there's a lot of people who sell kind of Samhain-y things. And these dolls that she sells, they're on like a dowel. She did such a great job making these. So they're on like a dowel, wrapped in some kind of yarn or fabric. And then there is a skull head. It's on the top. It's filled with something because you can hear it shake, the little rattle like that. And then this particular one, this is a fire. This is the rattle doll for the fire element. I actually have one for every element. I went over a course of a couple years and purchased them all from her. Here is her earth element doll. Sadly, I don't know where she is. She never came back to Pagan Pride after those first couple of years. But we went on to go ahead and make these ourselves, and that's what I want to share with you here. There's also a post that's going to be on our Body Mind Witchcraft Facebook page tomorrow that will give you further instructions on how to make these. So what you do is you want to go and get some skeletons. I usually get them from the dollar store. I noticed that Dollar Tree has some of them this year. And you want a skeleton where you can pull the head off, and then there's like going to be a hole at the base of the skull. And then what you do is you stick the head onto a dowel, and we usually use some glue from like a glue gun to make sure the head is going to stay on. And then from there, it's up to you. Now you just before you put the head on, what you need to do is in that hole of the skull, you're going to fill it with dried rice. That's going to be the easiest thing. It fits very easily in because it's so small. So fill it up. And then you put the head on, and then you can glue it in place with like kind of a drop of glue if you want. And then from there, you're going to decorate this in any way that you want. So we had fabric and ribbons, kind of like I sort of modeled it after the woman who had made them. I wrapped the dowel in fabric. Then I glued on some ribbons. I gave her a little veil. We have some little like bells that we kind of threaded onto the ribbons, little skull charms. So this is one that we made one year, and so we tend to make these often with the in-person coven. This one is a little bit like there's a little less to it, but nevertheless, she's got some ribbons here, and you can hear it when they shake. So I think it's a really nice activity that you can do for yourself. Like we certainly love doing it as adults, but kids really can get into this. And sometimes pagan parents are looking for something for their kids to do to sort of feel like they're part of the Sabbath as well. And so anyway, these are a really fun idea, but they're also functional because after you make them, you can use them in your Samhain ritual. Now, in place of the ringing of the bells, or in conjunction with the ringing of the bells, you can shake your dolls. So one idea would be in place of the bells, you would just shout out the name or say the name of someone who's crossed, and then her rice in here doesn't sound as good, but let's hear this one. Yeah, pretty good, right? So after you say the name, you shake the doll, the skull rattle doll, and honor the dead. And then you can also do this if you had a group of people, and let's say you had someone leading the ritual who calls out the names, or maybe someone calls out the names and then the leader rings the bell, and then everyone else in the ritual shakes their dolls. That's something that we have done in the past as well. So anyway, I love sharing that. Samhain is one of my favorite times. There's a lot of fun crafts you can do, but this is one, it takes a little bit of preparation to gather the materials and everything, but it's an easy activity. I am not terribly crafty, and I was able to make these, so I know you can too. So anyway, so that is the skull rattle dolls, and then something I also shared at Maybon so that people could prepare if they wanted to do this is you can also take a gourd, you put it out in the sun, and or like in my case, I put it on the windowsill, and then as it dries out, it also forms a natural rattle. And then these could be painted, they could be decorated for Samhain, and then they can also be used in the Samhain ritual. People can shake these as we're honoring the dead, or just at any part of the ritual, and just a really fun, nice idea. So now the problem with this is if you're watching this now and you want to make one, it won't really be ready for several weeks to a month or so. So now you'd have to make one probably for next year, next Samhain. Or get yours started early next year. I tend to recommend that people take the gourd from the Maybon ritual. Like, let's say they were honoring some plants and they were blessing some of the gourds and the fruits of the season, and then take a few at the end of that ritual and then place them outside or in the windowsill, see if you can get them to dry. And I will tell you, when I did this, there were two of them. One of them rotted, and this one worked. So sometimes I recommend putting out more than one in the chance that one of them ends up rotting. Okay, so that is making skull rattle dolls or gourd rattles. So now let's talk about the dumb supper. And I see that Nancy was saying she loves the idea of making the dolls. I know, I do too. It's such a fun activity. And like I said, I did notice Dollar Tree had the skulls this year, and you just got to find one that you can pop the head off and it still has the hole in it. Sometimes too, you're going to have to enlarge the hole a little bit. And for us, we just took like the end of a wooden spoon and we just tried to make that hole a little bit bigger so it fits on the end of the dowel. Okay, so let's talk about the Dumb Supper. So the Dumb Supper is another tradition of Samhain. This is a silent meal that is shared with our dearly departed loved ones. And you can do it as a solitary. You can also do it as a group. What you do is you prepare a meal. We like to prepare it with kind of squash and different fruits and vegetables of the season. So you prepare this meal, like soups and stews are really good for it too. If you eat meat or fake meat, you can do that too, kind of in alignment with Samhain being the meat harvest. And then you prepare this meal, everybody sits out, and then you add one extra placement setting with an extra bowl of the food or plate of the food and an extra chair. And then everyone eats silently. So it's a little bit, it's not as dramatic when you do it on your own, because if you're doing it on your own, most of the time when you eat alone, you don't talk to yourself. Maybe you do, but most people are just kind of eating silently by themselves. But if you're within a large group of people, it can seem a little bit disconcerting at first because you're used to conversation during meals, but this is a silent meal that is in reverence for the dead, who can't communicate with us, who don't have the voice that most of us can hear any longer. And so you eat this very silent meal together, And as you do so, you can think about the ones who have crossed over. You can contemplate your own mortality if you want to get into that. It's a bit morbid. I know this time of year can be a bit morbid for those reasons, but it is a time that forces us to kind of go inward and really think about things. But you can also think about memories that you shared with your loved ones who crossed over. Now, in the Dumb Supper, you don't usually set a placement for every single person that you're honoring. It's just one placement, and then that is meant to honor any of the dead who want to come and share the meal with you. And very has a lot of similarities too to like traditions of Dia de los Muertos. Like living here in Los Angeles, and especially in the part of LA where I live, where our Latino community is very large. We pass by the cemeteries, and you'll see people sitting eating the meals with their loved ones at the grave sites, and just such a beautiful way to honor those who crossed over, and just a celebration that really honors their life, and doesn't get us all dragged down into the sadness of it. Of course, it's sad to lose people that we love. Hopefully we understand through our own work that we aren't really separated from them all as one. Eventually we all find our way through the veils, and kind of understand that we all are connected to that universal energy. But it's very sad. It's very sad to lose someone that we loved. We worry about them, we wonder about them, we may have feel guilty about things we couldn't say or things that we did before they died. And I just think that when we celebrate in this way, we just can lift ourselves up out of that, and really honor their lives. Because one of the things that, I'm on a tangent, I didn't mean to talk about this tonight, but I think it's worth saying here too, is we contemplate our own mortality. I remember listening to this woman who was she was a channeler, and she happened to work in a hospice, and she provided hospice care for people who were dying. And she said that many people choose to die, like because she was a channeler, she was able to understand the choices that they were making. And she said many people choose to die at night because they don't want to, as they cross through, they don't want to deal with all of the sadness of all the people who are left here. Because it's really is a celebration, it's a liberation when they cross through. And the dead know that. It's the living that don't seem to. And so I just think that when we can honor with celebration, I think we're a little bit more aligned to what's really happening. And I think it also helps us ease our own pain and our own guilt, or whatever we're feeling about losing those that we love. So just a lot to unpack at Samhain. It's also kind of this time of year. We talked about it a little bit at Mabon too. Is this the time of year when people kind of get a little sad too? It's like the sun. There's not as much sun. There's not as much light, and so anything that we can do to lift us up during this time is, I think, can be very beneficial. So. Let's talk about another idea. So this is the idea that Christopher Penczak talks about in his book, The Mighty Dead. It's a great book for those who are Penczak fans, a really book that's well worth getting. In this book, he talks about the idea of the mighty dead. The mighty dead are not necessarily our own blood ancestors. They might be, but they are also those who have crossed through the veils, who were either like leaders of the spiritual community. So for example, like Kurt in the comments in the chat here, he had mentioned Raven Gramassi. Raven Gramassi has crossed through the veils. Other of our beloved teachers like Scott Cunningham, so those who have passed over the veils, but they were like great teachers to our community, they exist in the other realm as the mighty dead. And those are beings that we can call to our rituals during this time, or during any time. Penczak says it can be any time, but especially during this time when the veils are thin. The mighty dead also can include other witches from the past, like people we may not have known, or spiritual people from the land that we live on. Like we have blood ancestors, but we also have what he calls like the earth and the bone ancestors. It's like the ones who lived on this land that we're on right now, and the practices that they celebrated. And so he suggests that during a ritual, especially at this time of year, you leave a seat or you leave a space at your ritual for the mighty dead to attend. And you can actually also invite them. Like I open this space up. I invite the mighty dead to come and to share this ritual with me, to share this practice with me that I'm doing. So it's really great. I love the idea of it, and so I highly recommend that you try that. And if you are a Penzak fan, definitely get that book. It's well worth it. It's called The Mighty Dead. Another idea is the symbolic descent into the underworld. And so this can be like reading a ritual play or reading the stories during a ritual or during your kind of your practice of a deity that has descended into the world or into the underworld. And so some ideas are Anana. She honestly is one of the best ones because her descent into the underworld is so clearly a beautiful story of sort of the descent of us down into the underworld where we can become transformed. And I will tell more about her a little bit later in the Q&A because there was a question about Anana, so I want to share more about her. But talking, kind of reenacting her play or reading her mystery story during this time is a great way to celebrate Samhain. Other deities to think about would be Osiris, who also descends into the underworld, or Persephone. And that's not an exhaustive list, but those are three good deities that you can find a lot of information on about their descent. And then you can rewrite their story. You can reenact it. You could write a song about it. You could, if you're an artist, you could paint a picture or draw or make a collage or some way to honor the descent of the god or the goddess into the underworld. Now, other deities, while we're kind of talking about deities, other deities that maybe not necessarily have a descent into the underworld, but they do have a connection to the underworld, or to being able to kind of cross to the underworld, is Hecate. So even though she doesn't necessarily have a descent like Persephone does, Hecate was a goddess who was allowed to move in and out from the underworld. There's different reasons for it in the different myths. One of them was that her magic worked the best at night, so she had this connection to the underworld. But she is a great one to honor at Samhain. In fact, she's the one we'll be honoring in our own Coven of Midnight's Flame ritual on Friday that everyone's invited to. You can also work with Hades or Pluto. You can work with Hel, the Norse goddess Hel. Irishkagul, which I'll talk about a little bit later. She is the sister of Inanna. Caradwyn, because of her cauldron and her connection to the dead and sort of the mysteries of the unknown and the unconscious, she's connected to Samhain. Odin is always a good one for this time of year, and Lilith is another one that a lot of people like to work with at Samhain. Again, my lists are never exhaustive, just some ideas to get you started. But if you want to explore other deities, just look for deities connected to Samhain. You'll find many of the ones I mentioned, as well as probably some others. So the next idea, still kind of on that theme of honoring the dead, is the ancestor altar. Now you can build an ancestor altar that is both human and one for animals, or you can put everything on one altar. The ancestor altar is usually built, it is a temporary altar that is built at Samhain, which means that it is then taken down. Usually you place on it pictures, photos, mementos, offerings to those who crossed over. It's a beautiful practice, and in our own coven, we're going to be setting one up on the 31st here in my front yard. I think we're going to set up 2 altars like we usually do. One is for human ancestors who've passed through the veils, and the other is for our dearly departed pets. We got in the practice of doing 2 altars because there was so many of us, and there was just so many people that they wanted to honor, and we just didn't have enough space on one altar for everything. And so we decided to set up one for our animals and one for our human ancestors and those who've died, our friends and family who crossed through the veils. So beautiful, beautiful practice to do. We typically set the ancestor altar up on the night of the 31st and then take it down, but you can set it up earlier in the Samhain season You can leave it up for a while. You could build one now, and you could leave it up for several weeks if you want, and then start, taking it down as you feel the energy starts to shift into Yule energy. Now, some other ideas just for like main altars, ideas for Samhain: pumpkins, gourds. You can kind of think about the symbols of the season: leaves, acorns, animal horns, feathers that you found, crystal skulls is a really good one too. And that reminds me, you can always use a crystal skull at a ritual as well. That's something that Christopher Penczak talks about in The Mighty Dead, is placing a crystal skull on your altar, again, as an invitation to the ancestors of the witches to join us here, if you would like. And then of the colors for a Samhain altar are typically going to be orange, brown, red, black. It's the colors of the season, essentially. Okay, so there's another idea that I'm going to talk about here because it's about the dead, and then we'll talk about some other ideas that aren't necessarily related to those who crossed over. So the next idea is to, well, I guess this is about the deceased. So do some dream work. Dream work is very good at this time of year. You can do any type of dream work, but dream work that's really, really quite aligned with the energy of Samhain is dream work that connects to your ancestors or to those who crossed over. So people tell me all the time that they have dreams at this time of people that they love who've crossed through the veils. And so you can actually do some work with them during this. And so as you're going to bed, you can sort of make a connection to them. Think about the person that you would like to connect to who's crossed through the veils. Maybe visualize them, maybe even say their name or talk to them a little bit. And you can even tell them before you go to bed, tell them about a problem that you're having, or something that you need guidance on that you're not sure about the answer to. And then as you go to sleep, trust that you will have a connection to this person during your sleep. When you wake up, notice the first thing that pops into your mind. So even if you don't remember a dream and a presence of this person, just write down the first thing that comes to your mind. Write down any feelings that you have that you can contemplate about later, because sometimes there can be some really rich information in those first few seconds of waking up that dissipates very quickly. And so people will be very fast to say, I don't remember anything about my dreams, but yet they actually are thinking about something when they wake up, and that in itself is part of the dream work. So I really highly recommend, if you're going to do this, make sure to have some paper sitting down next to you, next to the bed, that you can just jot down those first few thoughts that are in your head, even if they seem irrelevant. And then really be open to the energy at this time of the season, because you may find that 12 hours later, as you're going about your day, that thought that you had in your head, that feeling, that was there, something that was lingering as you were waking up, all of a sudden makes sense because you see something out in the universe that triggers a memory or helps you understand and make the connection of the meaning. So that goes along with, anything at this time. We're going to be talking about some divination too. It's like really be open and receptive to the energy of the season. It's very, very much aligned to the opening of your unconscious. And that means that things can surface that have been hidden for some time that you haven't been able to access. So so I highly recommend sort of working with dream work, but maybe even think about reaching out and trying to connect to someone that you love who's crossed through the veils. Now, another thing you can do is to communicate with the dead while awake, and this can take place through different modalities, like using spirit boards, which is like a Ouija board. I think it was, who was it who made the Ouija board? Mattel, or I can't remember who made it, but the spirit boards, I like them a little bit better. They're more beautiful than the original Ouija board was. But it's definitely a way that you can communicate with the dead. You can use automatic writing. You can also do scrying. If you have a black mirror, you can do scrying in the black mirror and see if you can get some messages from the deceased that way. Just a word about spirit boards. I know there's a lot of kind of anxiety and fear that surround them. I think that some of them come from stories that people tell that have no, they may not even be true. Unless you've had a really bad experience using them, I don't think you necessarily have to be fearful of the experiences that other people have had. In my experience, There's not much to fear. It's more that you need to set boundaries, just like you would set boundaries with people in real waking life. You need to set boundaries with a spirit board as well. And you can absolutely say that the only people that you want to talk to are, you know, ancestors or something like that. That you're not interested in talking to just any spirit that is sort of coming through. So, I'd love to hear too about other people's experience with spirit boards. I mean, I've been using them. I don't use them as much. When I was much younger, I used them a lot. We contacted a lot of spirits that way. We did have, you know, spirits. I would not call them negative, not necessarily spirits to be fearful of, but there were spirits that kind of play tricks on you. They lie sometimes. So this is why setting up the boundaries are really important. And just put, you know, you can even put like cast a circle, put some protective magic around you, and then set up the intention. I really just want to talk to my ancestor. I want to talk to my grandmother. I want to talk to a friend who's crossed through, and set that intention just like you would set it in real life. You can do it in the spirit world as well. So that is working with the spirit boards, but would love to hear about other people's experiences. Chelsea said Milton Bradley. I was thinking like Parker or something. Yeah, Milton Bradley. Okay. Um, Okay, Tracy here, I'm in the chat here. I see Tracy said she's adopted. Is there a way to connect to my blood ancestors? Yeah, absolutely. Just in all of these different modalities that we're talking about, you can absolutely set that intention that you would like to connect to your blood ancestors. You know, the spirit world doesn't have the kind of rules and the space and time and all of that that we have here. It just simply doesn't work that way. And so your ability to connect to someone who died hundreds of years ago is the same as the ability to connect to someone who is recently deceased. And you can absolutely ask to be contacted by your birth mother or something like that, or a blood ancestor. You absolutely can do that. Just set the intention. And you can even leave offerings on your altar for your blood ancestors, and you're trying to make that connection. But you might enjoy that book that Christopher Penczak wrote, The Mighty Dead, because it talks about the blood ancestors, and like I said, it talks about the earth ancestors and the bone ancestors and all the different kinds of ancestors that we can have. Okay, so next idea is divination. It's a very much aligned activity for Samhain. Because the veils are thinner, that means that you are more receptive to messages coming from the other world, coming from your unconscious as well. So I recommend pull some cards on Samhain if that's the type of divination you like to do. But also take advantage of the fact that the veils are so thin and test your hand at a different form of divination you've never tried. If you've never done pendulum before, try it. If you've never done scrying before, try it. Another idea would be runes. You know, anything that you have not tried before. Reading tea leaves, like anything you've been interested in, learn about it and then see if you can try it at Samhain. But of course, you can always draw some cards and see what comes through at this time as well. And the couple more ideas, and then we'll go into the Q&A. So the next idea is poppet making. And this is actually what our coven will be doing. We're not doing it right on Samhain. We're actually going to be doing it on the 9th when we gather together online. And we're going to be making poppets. And so poppets are like, I mean, I guess probably in modern people, in your average person is going to think of this as a voodoo doll, and it's fine if you want to think of it that way. But a poppet is a doll that is made to represent a person. So I have a couple here. I was trying to find some of the other ones that I've made. And you can make poppets for any intention. They're very simple. You can get a pattern online. You cut it out. These are supposed to be little goddess ones, but you can make ones that look more like a human form that have legs as well. You stuff it with fabric. You can make these for different intentions. So your thread and your felt can be different colors. If you want to make one for healing, you could make it green. Or you can make it blue, or whatever the color feels of healing feels like to you. If you want it to be a love poppet, you can make it red or pink, or let's say you want peace and calm, and maybe you make it blue or purple for connecting to your intuition. So the sky is the limit with this. And you can put different herbs inside of it. You can put stones. I can feel her. We made this a long time ago, so I don't even remember what's in it. But I can feel there's some kind of like stick in here too. And so once it's all filled, then you stitch up the outside. Like I have mentioned, I am not crafty, and I'm able to stitch this. So I feel like anybody can do this, as long as you can thread the needle. And then you stitch around it, and then you can decorate the outside. Some people put like a heart or like eyes. We're going to put little buttons for the eyes. We're going to sew on, and then you can charge these with your intention. And so there, it's just like a really, I think it's a really great idea to craft to do at Samhain. And again, a nice idea for kids as well, especially if you're a pagan parent who's looking for a way to get your kids involved in the holiday, in the celebration. And then finally, that brings me to shadow work. Shadow work is good at all times of the wheel, but it's especially good right now because the veil's thin. It's not just the veils between the living and the dead, between, our plane and the next plane. It's also the veils between the unconscious and the conscious. This is why at Samhain people feel the pull inward to do some deeper work. Life is meant to be a path of self-discovery. You're meant to have fun. Absolutely. I love having fun. And we got to make sure that we are, doing good things for our inner child and we're enjoying life. But life is also meant to be a path of self-discovery, enlightenment being kind of the end goal. Now, shadow work allows us to start to uncover the unconscious processes that are going on inside of us, like our habits, our fears, our reactions, the things that seem to be out of control. Shadow work allows us to discover their source and to start to take back some of the control. Shadow work doesn't make everything instantly better, but it certainly makes it feel better when you understand why you're doing the things that you're doing. So think about a bad habit, or what is really the surest way to madness is when we are like repeatedly doing something and we don't know why and we can't stop and we just don't have any concept or insight into it. But shadow work helps us start to uncover that. So even if we don't immediately break the bad habits or we get rid of the fears right away, we still have the insight, which takes the edge off of it and it gets us a little bit further away from that edge to madness. And no, eventually, enlightenment is the goal of being incarnated here. You wouldn't be here if you weren't on some kind of a path. There wasn't some kind of a reason for it. And so the more that we can understand about ourselves and how we work and how our internal processes work, the less work we're going to have to do between incarnations. And I think this is a really important thing to talk about at Samhain because the people who deny the shadow, who claim that it doesn't exist or it doesn't apply to them, they'll be very, very shocked when they cross through the veils and the mask comes off, that mask that we're all wearing when we're here incarnated. And then it falls off and all of a sudden they realize that there's all this stuff that they didn't understand during life, and then they're faced with it in between. And I personally think that is where the idea of limbo or purgatory comes from. It's not some hellish place to hold you as punishment. It's a place to be, to do the work. So I personally, and people have heard me say this before, I personally would like to get some of the work done here so that there's less to do as we cross through. We have a more peaceful transition into the next plane. And then into the next incarnation. So it is not meant to scare you in any way. This is not like the hell and brimstone of Christianity in any way. It's just simply the greatest demon that we face is the one inside of us that makes us that makes us think we're disconnected from the universe, or makes us think that we're powerless, or makes us think that the mask we're wearing is really us. So anyway, your future incarnations, you have plenty of time to do more work like this, so you don't have to worry about like getting it right now. Just do what you can. Try to discover as much as you can. Be curious about yourself and be curious about the things that you do and why you do them. And try to do your shadow work when you can. but we're all going to be doing it in the next life as well. So it's not meant to scare you. This isn't like Christianity, where there's like you got to get it right now or you're going to a really bad place. No, this is like we constantly are learning the lessons as we move from one incarnation to the next one. But I would say do your shadow work now if you can. Now, Samhain is the perfect time to start. You can watch our Body, Mind, Witchcraft YouTube channel. There's lots of videos on there about shadow work. I'm going to be doing a free full-length workshop, Introduction to Shadow Work, in about a month for everybody. And you can also consider joining us in our Shadow Seekers membership, which will be opening up at the end of November. And we dive deep into all of this stuff in the membership. Okay, so let us move now into the Q&A. People who are live, you can put questions in the chat. I have a couple questions that were sent to me. I'm going to try to go through them as quickly as I can in the interest of time. But put your questions in the chat for me as well. It doesn't have to be about Samhain. It can be about witchcraft, shadow work, energy work. While you're getting your questions in, I'll start going through the ones that were left for me. And I also want to let you know that we do have our Samhain Ritual at the Crossroads coming up on Friday, November 1st. Those who are in the Shadow Seekers membership or our Covenant Midnight's Flame, everybody has free tickets to that. But if you're not in one of those groups, we would love for you to join us. I'm going to put a link in the chat right now for those who are live, and you can access it here. For anybody who's watching back in replay, as long as it's not already the first and the ritual's taken place, you will find the link underneath the video if you would like to join us as well. You can get a ticket for a donation of any amount, and then it will allow you to come online, come with us and do it live, or you'll also receive a link for a replay afterwards. You can do it in your own time, or you can go back and you can redo the meditation or watch it or anything if you want to rewatch it. So during our ritual, we'll have a tolling of the bells ceremony to honor those who've crossed over. We're then going to journey with Hecate to the crossroads, and we'll give you some space to connect to your ancestors there as well. It's going to be a really moving, powerful, transformative ritual. It's usually one of our best-selling rituals of the year. People are really into Samhain, and so I would definitely if you want to come, I would definitely get the ticket now if you don't have one or you're not one of our other groups. Just in case it does sell out. We have a limit on the number of tickets that we're selling, and they are going faster than we expected this year. So, all right. So let me move on to the questions really quick, and then I see we've got some coming in the chat as well. So the first question here is from Angela. She said, "Can you do shadow work without realizing that you're doing it?" Yes, definitely. It's an unconscious process. So absolutely, I hear stories of people all the time is when they sort of learn what shadow work is, they say, well, I've been doing that. I think I've been doing that before. And you absolutely can. You absolutely can be doing it without knowing it. Shadow work is really, at its very heart, it's making the unconscious conscious. So sometimes we think that shadow work is only about uncovering our negative qualities and then kind of working with those. But it's also about making anything unconscious conscious. And that can be anything that comes from your past in this life. It can be about discovering things about your past in other lives and gaining insight into that. So one of the probably easiest ways that people do shadow work, there's a variety of things to do, but one of the easiest things that people do is prompting. So it can sometimes surprise them when there aren't prompting, and then all of a sudden that they have some insight come through. But you absolutely, you're going to know that you've done shadow work is when you have that sort of aha moment and you have insight into something that has puzzled you for a long time. Like, why are you the way you are? And all of a sudden you realize, like, I've been acting this way my whole life because of that moment that happened to me when I was 5 years old. And all of a sudden that insight comes through and the aha moment comes through. And when that comes through unprompted, that's absolutely how people can be doing shadow work without even knowing that they're doing it. So very good question. The next question is from Aislin, and she's also has a question, lots of shadow work questions today. She said, I have so many questions about shadow work despite various posts and prompts in the group. She said, I don't know where to begin, and I'm never quite sure if I'm getting anywhere. So it can be difficult to know how to do it, what to do. This is why we have the uh, the shadow seekers group that we've created is to help people, because one of the things that I know in my own shadow work journey is I had the same question as Aislin. How do you know you're doing it right? So what we do in Shadow Seekers, we provide a space and a container for people to do it together, and then you have each other to talk to, and you have me as a guide who can kind of help you understand where you are on the journey. But outside of that, people can absolutely do it on their own as well. There's a variety of different paths that you can explore for shadow work, and you don't have to, you don't have to do the prompts. So one of them that's probably the simplest one is answering prompts that ask you questions that are designed to trigger something in your unconscious to hopefully bring up memories or help to make some kind of insight and connection. But outside of the prompts, which you can either do writing them down or just sitting and contemplating in a really relaxing pose, or taking a hike or a walk kind of at twilight or a transition space like that, and kind of thinking about the prompts. You can also do other work where you're working with your past lives. You're trying to gain insight into, what have you carried from this life, from that life into this life, and how is it affecting you here? And anything you can uncover from your unconscious during that process, during past life regression, in my opinion, that's shadow work too. Working with your inner child, that's shadow work too. Anything that we're doing that is uncovering the unconscious is shadow work. Now, I know the confusion that you feel though, because there's so much of it. And it can be hard to know where to go. So my advice to somebody who's not going to be in like a formal group like ours is you need to pick kind of like one thing, and you need to do it. So if you're going to do prompts, really do it. So you're going to pick a couple prompts, and you're going to do it maybe the same time every month. I recommend around the dark moon, but anytime you feel called inward. And you do that, you got to make a regular practice of it, because it's just like everything with witchcraft, right? You don't get very good at witchcraft or very experienced at the craft by just dabbling in it every once in a while. So same with this. Shadow work is a process that needs to be done over, over a continuous amount of time. Now, you could also pick past lives. So maybe you want to investigate your past lives, or you want to work with your inner child, or maybe you want to explore a chakra, and maybe start to work with your chakra system, and start with the root chakra and really explore what are the shadow aspects of the root chakra and how are you embodying those, and what kind of insight can you gain from that. But you got to start somewhere. And what I would do is, rather than just like with witchcraft, there's so much. You can't do tarot and runes and spells and goddesses and everything all at once. You've got to learn, you got to pace yourself, right? And you got to slow down. You got to try to learn a couple of things at a time, and you're going to learn things better. And the same goes with the shadow work. Now, as far as the question, though, is how do I know if I'm doing it right? If you're doing any of those things, you're doing it right. Sometimes we don't always get answers right away, but one way that you can know that you're getting somewhere is if you start to feel better. People who are on the path, who are kind of making progress with it, will have frequent aha moments when they gain that insight into something that they didn't understand before. And even if it doesn't solve all the problems, maybe it's just a scratching of the surface. That to me is progress. Your progress is found when you start to feel better, when you start to feel things are being lifted off of your shoulders, when you start to gain some insight into what's going on internally. That's how you're going to know you're making the progress. All right, very good question. So the next question is from Dawn, and she said, is shadow work important even if you didn't go through major trauma as a child? And so yes, I think that one of the greatest disservices that we can ever do to ourselves is to compare ourselves to somebody else's problems and trauma and life, and sort of look at it and say, mine's not as bad as that. And so maybe this type of work isn't going to help me, or maybe I don't need it. And I know I can speak from my own experience of recovering from a very serious eating disorder, is that I don't have the stories of rape or of sexual abuse or some of the traumas that some of the other women had that would be in those groups that when I was in therapy, group therapy, I was hospitalized. for my eating disorder a couple of times when I was younger. And I just didn't have those stories. And in fact, I would be like, my life was pretty good. Who am I to be complaining or to feel like I'm taking, like almost like I'm like taking away from them or something by even being here. And it's just such a disservice because we all have trauma, even if we don't know it. And it doesn't mean that it's like taking away from somebody else's trauma to call ours trauma too. And so I think that's the number one thing I would say to people is to really like don't disvalue your own experience. And many of the people who are in our Shadow Seekers membership will say things like we'll do these workshops and they'll say, like if they go into it and they're like, I don't think I'm going to get, I don't think this applies to me, or I'm not sure I'm going to get very much out of it, but I'm going to go to it anyway. And then they come out of it and they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize that I was affected by this too. So it's, we all have shadow work to do. Everybody's got a different kind of shadow work to do. Again, shadow work is just discovering who we truly are, really embracing the more negative qualities of us that we've pushed out to the fringes and bringing things into the light, bringing them into consciousness so we can deal with them here. And we all have that work to do. Now, Dawn also was asking about tinnitus because she said she has tinnitus and has a horrible time with silence. Is there any good witchy music with words or without words that I could do during spell work and ritual? I also have bad tinnitus, and I get it. It's hard to be in the silence. So I think that one thing you can do is just get a noisemaker, maybe not even necessarily white noise, but like an ocean sound, rain falling, the sound of a forest, something that's very soothing to you, and play some kind of nature music and that, or nature sounds, and that could be very good for someone with tinnitus when they're trying to concentrate on their rituals and their spell work. As far as music goes, I love Lorena McKennitt. I've done many, many rituals to her music. I loved Enya when I was little, and so I've done lots of rituals to her music. Those are kind of my two go-tos, but you can also, it's just whatever you like. I hope maybe some people in the chat can also suggest some artists with or without music that you think would be good, or sorry, with or without lyrics that you think would be good for someone who wanted some music for ritual space. Another thought too is to get Insight Timer. It's a free app. If you don't have it already, you can get that, and there's lots of different sounds and kind of music, kind of meditative music on there. Binaural beats for different chakras. You can Google that and you'll find a lot on YouTube. And my suggestion for people is just find something that you like, something that sounds good, and listen to that. There's not really a right or wrong to choosing that. It's more like, what is your taste? But hopefully other people can maybe come into the chat with some suggestions too about music to use during ritual and spell work. We have a question here from Amber. She said, how can I differentiate my energy from others? Very good question. So it can be hard, it can be challenging to figure out where our energy begins and the next person's, where ours ends and the next person's begins, especially if you're highly sensitive, an empathic person, you're picking up other people's energy all the time. So I think that one of the things that you can think about is when you start to feel a certain way, really ask yourself where that feeling could be coming from. If you have like an overwhelming feeling of fear or sadness or something like that, and it seems to come out of the blue, it could be yours. It could be. It could be things trying to sort of bubble up from the unconscious. But it also, if it seems like it comes totally out of nowhere and you were in a totally fine mood and now you're not, it could be that you're picking up on other people's energy. That's always the way that I think about it. If it comes out of nowhere, it's oftentimes not mine. For people who are particularly sensitive to energy, I would recommend doing a lot of grounding and shielding kind of practices. I think it was like maybe 10 or 12 weeks ago, did a YouTube, did a live like this, and then therefore there's a video on YouTube about grounding and shielding. And I'm pretty sure I think I recommended it last episode, and I'm going to recommend it again here. Let me just put this in the chat for anybody who missed this, and especially for Amber. I think that you might find this video beneficial. So this is grounding and shielding techniques. So I recommend that people who are highly sensitive, feel like you might be kind of picking up on other people's energy or not sure what's yours and somebody else's, watch that video, get some ideas on how you can ground and shield yourself. You'll start to feel a lot better probably. And if you do start to feel a lot better when you do those techniques, then you're going to know that you were picking up on other people's energy. But probably one of the best ways to tell is, if it comes out of nowhere and it seems very unrelated to the situation that you're in, it's likely to not be yours. And then finally, Kurt asked about Inanna, the goddess. He said, what do we know about the goddess, or what do I know about the goddess Inanna? So she is a Mesopotamian goddess. I mentioned earlier, she has a descent down into the underworld. She is considered the queen of heaven once she ascended back up from the underworld. One of the things that is very interesting about her is we can use her. So she basically descended from heaven to earth, and then she descended from earth down into the underworld. And the story goes that her brother, I think it was her brother, had died. Yeah, her brother Uti had died, and Utu had died, and she was going down into the underworld to go to his funeral, and her sister Erishkigal was there, and Erishkigal had these major problems with Inanna, and so she created this really difficult way that Inanna would descend into the underworld, and there were these 7 gates that she'd have to go through. And at every gate, she would have to remove like a piece of her clothing. And what a lot of people don't realize is the pieces of clothing that she was removing, and it was also jewelry, each of them covered up a chakra. And so she removed something from her throat. She has a belt around her belly, which would be her solar plexus. And so it's basically the descent into the underworld is like, to me, it's a descent into the unconscious, into this place to face the shadow. And you're kind of bearing all of your chakras as you're going. And I think that I love this because it's such an ancient old story, and yet it's merging shadow work with energy work, which is what we're doing here in Body Mind Witchcraft, in modern times as witches. And so anyway, once she descended into the underworld, she stripped herself bare. She stood in front of Erishkigal, who then like basically maims her, hangs her from this meat hook, where it's not kind of like Odin. She has this time to contemplate. This is the space where she's in her shadow, sort of contemplating things. And then when it's over, she then ascends back up to the earth and then back up to heaven, and then takes her place as Queen of Heaven again. So it's a beautiful, beautiful story, and we did do a ritual for Inanna in Shadow Seekers like 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, and we will be doing another Inanna ritual again for those who are in Shadow Seekers. We have that to look forward to, but also she's a great goddess to work with at Samhain. So, all right, let me go into the chat and let me see. If I've got any questions here. Okay, I'm just going back to kind of see. If I miss anybody, I'm definitely going to come back in here later and look at these. There's a lot here. So some people were talking about Ouija board in the chat, I see. So Kurt said he was present when some coven members had used one and they contacted a witch ancestor, and it was a very amazing experience. Jennifer had said she's always scared of accidentally summoning a demon or something with spirit boards, and she said maybe she watches too many movies. So yeah, I think that sometimes the fearfulness that we have, like I've used them many, many, many times. I like Jennifer, when I was very young, and I was kind of transitioning, this is like about 18 to 19 years old, I was transitioning from being a Christian to fully being a pagan. I went through a time too where I was very afraid of anything spirit-like, including the Ouija boards I was using. And I will tell you, it wasn't a Ouija board, it was a psychic circle is what it was called. And I became convinced it was like the devil, because that's what they tell us in church. And I broke the board and I put like crystals all around and I threw it in a pond when I was like 18 or something like that. Um, I don't think that I don't think you need to be worried about accidentally summoning a demon. Like I said, you want to just put up a protective kind of boundary around. The intention is that I want to contact. Be very specific about the person you want to contact. Um, it's Jennifer. Jenny had said she's done it when not casting a circle or having the protection up, and she says she doesn't recommend doing it like that. She said her sister won't let her go near one because of it. And I agree with that. I think that you, like I said, there are beings that don't have your best interest at heart, and if you're not clear about your boundaries, that you can bring some of those through. I think if you cast a circle, you do a lot of protection magic. It can you can prevent that. The other thing is too, if you start to freak out about it and you feel like something is there, you can just you stop. You don't have to continue. But I agree with Jenny. I would probably cast a circle. I would have some kind of protective measures around me. Um, Kurt said he witnessed that these two people they were trained in putting up boundaries around against any energy being taken. Um, Jennifer asked if you would cast a literal circle with salt or more of a symbolic one with a wand incense. You could do either or both. If you're really worried about being protected, you can absolutely do both. Absolutely do both. Okay. I'm just seeing if there's any questions in here. Okay, I think that's all of our questions here. Kurt had said at the end here, he said, I'd mentioned monetizing the YouTube channel and what are the standards? Yes, so to monetize the YouTube channel, you need 1,000 subscribers and you need, I think it's like 4,000 hours of view time in 1 year. So we're getting close to our 1,000 subscribers. We've got to work on the view time, but I'll be making more videos in order to do that. Anyway, I don't see questions here, so I'm going to sign off. It's gone long, but that is okay. I always enjoy spending time with you guys on these Tuesday nights. So for those who are watching back in replay, especially anybody who's not subscribed to our YouTube channel, make sure to subscribe to the Body Mind Witchcraft YouTube channel. That way you won't miss any future episodes, and you will help us get to that 1,000 subscribers we need to monetize our channel. Don't forget that we have our Samhain ritual coming up on November 1st. We would love to see some of you there. Check for the link in the chat and you can grab a ticket that way or underneath the video if you're watching on YouTube. Make sure to leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the video. And that way we help to get that out to more people. Just to let you know what's also coming up on 11/5, I'm undecided if I'm going to be doing an episode or not. We may take the week off. If I do an episode, it'll probably be on relaxation techniques that I really love. And then on 11/12, I'll be back with an all-new episode on the archetypes of the god, which is the companion episode to one that we did a few weeks ago on archetypes of the goddess. All right, well, happy Samhain, everyone, and I hope this video and this episode gave you a lot of ideas on how you can celebrate the start of Samhain season and into the rest of Samhain season, which, remember, lasts about 5 to 6 weeks, not just that one day. All right, until next time, blessed be.